If you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you, if you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowances for their doubting too, if you can wait and not be tired by waiting, or being lied about, yet don't deal in lies, or being hated, yet don't give way to hating, and yet don't look too good, nor talk too wise, if you can dream and not make dreams your master, if you can think and not make thoughts your aim, if you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two impostors just the same, if you can bear to hear the truth you've spoken, twisted by knaves to make a trap for fools, or watch the things you've given your life to broken and stoop down and build them up with worn out tools, if you can talk with crowds and keep your virtue, or walk with kings nor lose the common touch, if neither foe nor friend can hurt you, if all men count with you but none too much, if you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, yours is the earth and everything that is in it, and which is more, will be a man, my son. Hey, my name is Steve Hinton, and I serve as a pastor and author.
I'm your co-host, Matthias. I serve as a personal trainer and a volunteer at my local church.
We want to welcome you to The Man Identity, a podcast that is dedicated to calling up young men into purposeful manhood, which is ultimately found in Jesus Christ and being made in the image of God.
In a culture that is often deliberately set against young men, we're here to intentionally build hope, clarity, and strength into the hearts of these men who are searching for purpose. Together, we will face tough issues head on, throw down some weekly challenges, and have some fun along the way.
Because solid manhood is not automatic, but rather it's a choice. We're here to walk alongside you and encourage you to live out your authentic identity in being made in the image of God for a purpose larger than you have ever imagined.
So join us now for another episode of The Man Identity. Steve, I've never heard that poem before. It actually really resonated with me because every instance of that poem is like he was trying to say, be confident in yourself in this situation, in this regard, in this regard. If you can do this when this is happening, then this, and that's something I think I've really been learning about myself the last probably few months or so, is that I just don't feel as confident as I would in my choices. But being married, I've seen myself grow in my confidence in knowing that when tensions are high between me and my wife or something, if I can keep my composure, if I can do this, if I can do that, then this will turn out, then this will happen. If I can do this with my children, then this will happen. If I have that confidence and self-control to be able to keep myself and keep my composure, it's almost like a defining trait of a man almost. It's how it feels to me from this poem.
Yeah, and I love your response to that, and it's not surprising you haven't heard it before. I remember reading it for the first time. I don't know, I was maybe a sophomore or junior in high school. English literature, our professor had us read it, and it was written about 1896, about a year after a failed British military attempt in what was the early days of the Boer War in South Africa. Sir Leander Jameson had about 500 men, and he attempted a military action which was really disastrous historically. But the press got wind of it, and the reality that Jameson, he didn't point the blame at anyone else. He accepted responsibility, and Rudyard Kipling wrote it, and it conveys this idea of a man who aspires, he's calm, he's brave, regardless of what the world throws at him. And Kipling wrote that poem not so much as a particular father to a particular son, but the general idea of older men to younger men. These are what you see in strong, solid manhood. And I understand you haven't heard that poem today or poems like that today. Actually, if you look at our culture today, we have a lot of the opposite. You look at literature, if you look at Hollywood, if you look at movie and media, we find the opposite. I mean, men are foolish. In literature, men are felons. They're bad guys. They're ferocious, like John Wick. Ultimately, men are at fault for everything in the world that we live in today. If you look at the literature, if you look at the things that are around us.
Oh yeah, I think if I see this all the time, and I think a big part of the way that it kind of permeates society is like you said, with Hollywood, with actors, with people who are well known, and you see a common theme of demasculinization of them, and it's pushing this almost normative type feature onto society, and everybody starts adopting that.
Well, I think where did this come from? Well, part of it has been going on for years and years and years. We have a societal breakdown of the family. We have an epidemic of fatherlessness. The father's not there to mentor the young man on how to grow. But also, there's a systemic force in our culture today. And systemic, that's a word that's been thrown around, catchphrase, for a number of years now, indicating that something that's permeating our culture. A few years ago, a lady by the name of Nancy Percy wrote a book called The Toxic War on Masculinity. And she makes the observation in 2018, the American Association of Psychology deemed that traditional manhood is actually psychologically dangerous to boys. So we see that in radical feminism has taken off, and you look at radical feminism today, and it's not so much women wanting equal rights. They just want to destroy manhood. I watched a clip. The lady was outright. She said, well, I'm not sure I hate men. Then she goes, well, I actually do. I hate men. Okay. And we see that idea permeating so much of our culture today. Yeah. You look at public schools. Public schools are designed for, especially when you look at kindergarten, first grade, second grade, designed for girls who know how to sit still, boys who have more energy to do whatever. A big illustration for me is the Boy Scouts of America. Boy Scouts was actually started in England, early 20th century, Baden-Powell. Girl Scouts was started about 10 years after that. But you look at Boy Scouts in America and the downward spiral. I mean, it began firstly with a gender fluidity. Boys who feel gayness can be involved in things of that nature. And now it's come to a place where girls can join Boy Scouts. And the Boy Scouts still have a lot of good qualities. I was in Colorado last month, and there was a Boy Scout troop that came all the way from New York traveling to Philmont, which is this huge scout ranch. But the reality is girls can be Boy Scouts now. But when you look at the Girl Scout institution, it is very girl-centric, that they've maintained this is for girls, to help girls be women. Boy Scouts aren't there anymore. And there are ripple effects to all of these issues in our day. We see young men who are dropping out all over the place. Less young men are going to college, and we want young women to go to college, but young men are dropping out. Young men aren't pursuing careers. Young men aren't pursuing marriage. Young men aren't pursuing anything. And a big issue, the reality is you look at all the data, and young men are 3 to 4 times more likely to commit suicide than what young women are. So there are all these ripple effects, ramifications of this agenda to really demasculate and tell boys, you need to be more like girls, you need to calm down. And I think even women are confused. I remember watching a commercial, football commercial, and this young woman gets a credit card and she's excited. So all these little vignettes on what she does with her credit card. And there's this one point where she's out on a date. The waiter brings the check. He drops the check, and the man just kind of looks around, and the woman's frustrated. Oh no, I've got to use my credit card to pay for this, date. And I thought, well, that's illustrative, because if a guy says, I'm going to pay for it, well, the women say, well, you're toxic. Well, if the guy doesn't step up, they say, well, you're passive, you're a loser. So even women are confused. There's all this confusion on what it means to be.
So that's why we're doing this.
That is why we are doing this podcast. And the purpose is simple, that we want to call young men up. We want to say we believe in you. We want to encourage you. We want to call you up into purposeful manhood. Now, it's interesting, Matthias, because I've actually been thinking about doing this sort of thing for close to 12 years now. And the interesting thing would be the last 12 months. Back in December of last year, I got an email from the editor of a Christian online journal called renew.org, a great, solid journal. And he asked me to write an article about a British guy by the name of Andrew Tate. Now, we'll talk more about that later on. But the more I dove into that article, I realized the focus didn't really need to be so much about Andrew Tate, but why is it that young men are following Andrew Tate? Because he's a jerk. I mean, Andrew Tate's a jerk. But why are so many young men following him? So that happened back in December of last year. It took me about a month to write the article because all the research I was doing. But then about March of this year, I got an email from one of my buddies in Indiana, Rick Grover. He's a preacher. He disciples young men, and he sent me a podcast by another British guy. I just lost his name, Justin Brierley. Great podcast. The particular episode was called "The Male Identity Crisis," and the reality that there are so many men in the UK, in America, young men, boys and young men, who are trying to figure out who they are. The third thing that kind of helped us pull the trigger on this, back in May, I had an opportunity to go to England with a great ministry called Marked Men for Christ. And I was there and I was working with young men. We're going to hear from a couple of those here in a minute. And I was able to talk with them about their culture and even some older men looking at the British culture and what's really going on today. I think finally, Matthias, just looking at our own church. I mean, here we are. We're doing our very first podcast. Here we are, Cypress Crossings Christian Church Auditorium. What's the important connection there? Well, we are actually reversing the trend here at our church, and I give God the credit for that. But the trend has always been that men don't want to go to church. Young men especially aren't interested in going to church. Well, what we're finding out, we actually have more young men here at our church than we do young women. So something's happening there. And part of the way we know what God's doing is, or what we should be doing, is by diving into where God is moving already. So looking at everything that's come up to this point, again, I've been thinking about this for 12 years, and the reality of what's going on in our church and what's going on in your life and my life, it seems like now is the time to.
Okay. So I know you've been thinking about this podcast for a long time. I don't know if you had a specific topic or kind of coverage you wanted to do. So it seems like we're really honing in on young men, trying to bring up young men into the calling that they're called to be in Christ. So tell me about the name of the podcast.
The name of the podcast, The Man Identity. I was looking at some various scripture passages. I was looking at a lot of options, and I asked my two sons, I asked my two son-in-laws, I asked some other guys, and then one of my sons, he just stopped and he said, "Dad, the Bourne Identity, the Bourne Identity." 2002, there's that action movie, Jason Bourne, CIA assassin, and he gets amnesia. He can't figure out who he is. And I knew immediately that was it, because we have so many young men, they don't know what their identity is. They don't know who they are. They don't know if they are a man or not. What does it mean to be a man? How do you know? They don't know what their purpose is. And I thought that's it right there.
I think that's actually perfect. It almost encapsulates the entire male experience right now in 2025. It's just men. It seems like the pendulum swinging all over the place. It seems like we have forgotten what it really means to be a man. And so I think that's like the perfect name for the podcast. Now that we've covered why the podcast is here, now that we've covered why it's named what it's named, what's the plan for today? What's this first episode about?
The first episode, well, to begin with, all of our episodes are not going to be one Matthias of looking around and finding all the problems and pointing out the problems. But we want to build on a good foundation. We want to point people to what's really important. We want to put positive out there. But I think going back to the Andrew Tate article kind of sets our background today. Again, the editor said, "Hey, Steve, why don't you write this article?" And I had heard of Andrew Tate, but I didn't know much about him. I knew he was this media phenomena, kickboxer. So I began to look around. One guy said, "Steve, don't write that article because writing about Andrew Tate, it's like clickbait." Another guy said, "Steve, if you do that, talking about Andrew Tate for young men, it's like smoking dope." And I had other guys gave more colorful language of the guy, but the more I studied him and what was going on, and the article took me like a month to write because of all the research I put into it.
Oh man, how many Andrew Tate videos did you have to watch?
Well, and it wasn't so much, and I watched some Andrew Tate videos. I watched some Andrew Tate interviews, a lot of them, but I read and I read and I read, and where I landed on that, if we really care about young men, we have to look at why young men are attracted to him.
It's like market research. You have to know what's bringing people to a specific product. And it's like you need to study that out to figure out, how can I fix this? How can I bring them to this product?
How can I fix it? Yeah.
How can I bring it to my product or, to whatever, like they do in marketing. I'm not a market guy.
Well, you're identifying the problem, and,
yes.
and that's what I told the editor, that I want to do this, but I want to write it from the perspective of discovering why young men are following Andrew Tate. In the article, I quoted a British journal that said a fifth of British Gen Z have a favorable opinion of him. Now, that's got to tell us that there's something there. And in the article, part of my observation is there was all this study saying Tate's bad, Tate's bad, Tate's bad. And I get it. We all get it. But there was very little saying, okay, here is the root issue and here's what we do about it. Very little was doing that. So in the article, and you can find, and we'll have all the data in our show notes. You can look all this up. But I gave 4 suggestions. The last suggestion was we need to point young men ultimately to the perfect man, Jesus Christ. Jesus was two things. He's the divine Son of God. He was also the perfect man. So we want to point men to Jesus Christ. So this is what we're doing today, and kind of kick things off. This is not just you and me talking, but I want to get some input from other men. So, Matthias, what I want to do today is look at some clips of some interviews where I talked to some guys about these issues to get their experience, their wisdom. And the first one, I love this guy. I've only known him since May. Max Newton, 37-year-old guy, lives in London, a single guy. He works with young men. He's got a master's of international marketing, and he disciples men in his firm. He's very interested in apologetics, which is giving a defense and answer to the questions that people have about Christianity and sharing his faith. And part of the reason I wanted to talk to Max is, and I asked him this question, The Guardian quoted a fifth of young men, Gen Z, have a favorable opinion of Andrew Tate. So we want to listen to Max, and then I want to go across the pond into Europe, talking to a guy named Wolfgang. And I met Wolfgang in London back in May as well at the Markman for Christ event. Wolfgang's older. He's 54. He's been married for 25 years. He works in the business industry, the sales industry. He works with men in his local church. But just to get his feel on what's going on with men there in Germany. So this is not just, something that we're dealing here in America. From there, we're going to go to a guy named James. And James is a guy, an older guy, 62. And it's like wisdom just drips off James, and he's been in vocational ministry for about 30 years now. But prior to that, he was in the oil industry. He's been married since 1983. So he's got some real life experience. He's got some wisdom, academic. He's just got some wisdom to bring to that. And then academically, then I had a conversation with a guy named Dr. Rob Fleener. We went to school with each other, didn't really know each other very well, a couple years removed. But Rob teaches in the academic setting. He has a PhD in Old Testament studies. And again, we're going to have all their specific information in the show notes. But Rob gives us a little bit more understanding from Genesis chapter 1, where it talks about the fact that we are created in the image of God and what does that mean. And then finally, I mentioned his name earlier, Rick Grover. He's the guy that sent me the podcast by Justin Brierley and the Male Identity Crisis. Rick is 58, a little bit older than me, been married for 34 years, has 3 children, and he's been in vocational ministry for a long time. So he's been working with people, and to kind of get his take on all of these issues as well, and what are we really dealing with? And I'm glad that you're here today, and I believe that you can bring some commentary to this. Now, you read the article that I did over Andrew Tate last year, and it wasn't so much about Tate, it was about why young men are just going in droves after him. And early in the article, I cited a British journal, The Guardian, a huge English newspaper, and in that, it made the observation that a fifth of Gen Z men in the UK have a favorable opinion of Andrew Tate. And so the first question is, you being there, boots on the ground, Max, is that about accurate? And can you describe that if so?
Yes, Steve. I think The Guardian releasing some data on the Gen Z attraction towards Andrew Tate, I think is very interesting. Bear in mind, it's a very left-leaning publication. So, I would take some of it with a pinch of salt, but the data is probably the data. From my point of view, and, there's nothing scientific or empirical here, but from conversations I have and just being observant and listening, ear to the ground listening, I would probably say that 1 in 5 is about right, probably more, to be honest. Also, from the perspective of young men, I've got one interesting anecdote which I shared with you yesterday. I'm lucky enough to be able to work as a sales director, and I look after 23-year-old men going up to 35. So I work really interesting cross section. I work with a lot of emotion and a lot of different perceptions and viewpoints in the world, and I get to meet men at different stages in their evolution or their formation. So I'm dealing with these guys, and I'm quite blessed that that Jesus Christ found me again. I'm born again, but I work with people that are at the stage where they haven't yet been found by Jesus Christ. So I like to think that I can give them some wisdom from what I understand from my biblical worldview. But we had a gentleman, we had a guy. His name I won't state his name, but really clever guy from a very good family, working class though. I think quite important to know. And him and his friends went on a road trip to Bulgaria last year, last summer. So when you'd expect, a group of 5, 6, 25-year-old guys that are making really good money, when you would expect them to be going to Ibiza or Spain, that sort of thing, or to the World Cup to go and, experience competitive events. No, this unique little group went to Bulgaria for a road trip. Now, we highlighted
Bulgaria,
Bulgaria of all places, and some of the other guys in the group, we started to prod him and give him a bit of stick over that. We were saying to him, why are you going to Bulgaria? Who goes to Bulgaria? That sort of thing. And we said, you're going to see Andrew Tate, aren't you? And we started prodding him. And he did not deny that. He did not deny that. Refused to deny it. Mm-hmm. Which is what sort of leads me to believe that maybe that either Andrew Tate has influenced him to want to go and visit Bulgaria, or He's gone over for a stop over at the big Tate compound with all the Bugattis and Ferraris. That is advertised on social media.
In the culture today, why is it? What is missing, or what is happening to cause young men to say, "I'm going to go after this guy"? What is stirring? What is affecting them? What's happening to cause them to want to pursue this, other than just, hey, make more money?
Well, I mean, that's a very, very insightful question, Steve. Now, for me, being a Christian male in Britain today, for me, if I want to look at the number one underlying ripple or underlying cause, and what's happening under the ground that's causing these fissures, for me, I think there's been a systematic cultural dismantling of the link between the teachings of Jesus Christ and society. That natural link that has almost been there for the last 1,000 years, that has been systematically dismantled in favor of creating new structures based around money and competition. That's for me, that if we want to take it back, they are probably the most important measures.
What has been your observation about what the culture in your part of the world is speaking to young men today, that young men are having to wade through?
I think actually, especially when it comes to Germany, the main issue for young men, for young boys, is, in my observation, a kind of massively inner conflict regarding the role concept which they learned and which they were more or less, let's phrase it in brackets, educated in during the kindergarten time, during the school time, during university, to being very kind, to being very understanding, especially when it comes towards women.
Okay.
Which is, on a first point of view, absolutely okay. The bit difficult thing in that situation is that they were also told it's not okay to solve conflicts also in a kind of aggressive way. I do not talk about fighting, or really hurting other people, but in a more aggressive way, which is mainly a classical male attitude to go in conflicts.
Boys just being boys.
Boys just being boys, exactly. And on the other hand, once they came out of this education system, let's phrase it like this, they come in the professional life. They start their jobs, their first jobs. And in the economical environment, they learn, or they need to learn very fast, that everything what they learned so far until then is no more useful in a professional life. Because there they have really to fight for what they want. They really need to fight for success. They really need to play even sometimes unfair to be more successful than the others. And this is a massively role conflict, which you also realize when you discuss with even a bit more aged men, let's say at the end of the 30s, at the beginning of the 40s, they really claim that they need to play two completely different roles. They need to play the hard guy in the business, and at home they need to be absolutely soft and understanding and caring and whatever. And I think this is a really big challenge to come to a point that both is possible in the right context. And I think what I realize when I discuss with boys, especially when I discuss with some men, even more developed men or more experienced men, they really have a big issue to bring the both extreme aspects of these role splits together. And I think what is really, really important is to get the young boys the first advice that they do not need to think in a kind of black and white. They need to think a bit more in gray shades.
Okay.
Yeah. So the truth is between these both poles and not
Balance.
balance. It's balance, and the balance, in my perspective, you can really find in the perfect role model we all have in Jesus Christ.
But thinking about why it is that young men or boys, a fifth of Gen Z in England, but young men and boys are following Andrew Tate or somebody like him. And, James, we could talk about the feminist movement. We could talk about education. We could talk about the lack of fathers. There are a lot of things we could talk about, but I'm wondering, especially when we consider Genesis 1, James, do you think there's anything else, I don't know, kind of at a primal type level that's going on underneath that is in the heart of all young men, regardless of where they live on the planet?
Steve, I appreciate the question, and thanks for having me on. I'm deeply grateful for that, and just to be able to be a part of the discussion, because I think right now it is we are on the tea kettle that has already tipped, and when it comes to the masculine virtue in our society. As you know, my wife's from England, so I look back over at the UK for a lot of things, and I'll tell you why. It's because usually whatever the UK is doing, give the US 20 years and we'll be following suit. And so far that has been the case, especially when it comes to the battle of the sexes. Whoever thought that there would be more than two in that fight? So now what we're facing is what the culture has officially pressed in upon the male portion of society through not only education, but also now in the arts, from the consumer-based market as well. It's all based upon putting men in a place that they want them to be. But the problem that I see with that, Steve, is that you can't beat biology. Mm-hmm. It's implicit to us, and we can dance around with pronouns, even surgeries, even applications of certain medical things to try to change that. But there's something that is intrinsic and instinctual inside of all of us, having been created to a certain purpose. Now, whether or not we acknowledge that purpose is for another podcast, but that the purpose is still implicitly there. So when we try to fight that, try to make it be something else, you can win at that battle for a little while, but you haven't gotten rid of it. You've only, for lack of better phraseology, compressed it into a space. And now we've hit the point where the space has ruptured, the cracks are in the fissures are in the rock, and it's busting out. And when it comes out, it looks like Tate. Because he's able to appeal at some of the base things that we are called to in purpose. We're called to defend the women and the families. We're called to pick up the shovel and dig the dirt. We're called to all of these things that are traditionally masculine. So that appeals. But along with that comes the notion that you can basically be hedonistic and take what you want, and you deserve
in the Tate version.
Yeah. Yes. So the instinctual prospect, we have to look at it from two perspectives. There's the one that was in the Garden of Eden, which is perfect. But now the instinct has been altered into that which is broken. So, when we talk about this is our nature, well, which one are we talking about? Because our nature was perfection in the garden, but when we came out after the fall, now it's imperfect. So if we're going to talk about the broken nature, that's what people like Tate appeal to. And it's an overabundance and excessiveness of all the things that we were supposed to be about. Tate, he was in the martial arts arenas. And so you've got that tough guy thing that can come in, and beat up whoever or properly take care of his women, the way he talks about. And while men have been told for years now, shut up, sit down, be quiet. If somebody hits you, you go tell the teacher, you don't hit them back. You'll get in just as much trouble as they will if you defend yourself. All of these things. And see, now that frustrated male has busted out. Tate and others have seized the moment. It's very profitable too, by the way.
From your expertise, can you unpack that a little bit? What is in that idea of being created in the image of God, and particularly as a man?
Binary pairs, right? God creates darkness and light, day and night, and land and sea. And by the time he gets to the pinnacle of his creation, the zenith, that's us, that's people. He does one final pair, and that is mankind, the generic term for humanity, made in his image. And the text is very emphatic that he created them male and female. That God relied on a binary pair to holistically recreate his image. So man, the male doesn't get it by himself. The female doesn't get it by herself. But together they were designed to be a pair that reflects the full image of God. Theologically, with the fall and the introduction of sin, that it shattered and schismed that.
Mm-hmm.
So rather than the unity of recreation of the image of God as we have been designed to do, all that humanity seems to be left with is this friction, and that's been part of the difficulty. But if we back up and look at the idea of being made in God's image, then we have to say, well, what is the differences between men and women, male and female, and maybe as men, do we have a part of God's image? Maybe that's separate from what women have, and that's an interesting discussion. It's not one that's really popular in our culture.
Right.
We've had multiple decades of gender thinking at the popular level, trying to homogenize the genders. The men and women are identical in the way they think, the way they approach. That it's all environment, it's all sociology and socialization that ends up creating the distinctions, and rooted in things like patriarchy and all of that. And yet, the theological tradition and the position in the church is that there is this binary between male and female, and for his purposes, God made them different. So then we have to ask, what did God make distinct about men as opposed to women? How are they different? And we could obviously look at the fundamental level, which is the biology, right? That men tend to be able to impregnate females. So it's the females that house, raise, nurture children, and they tend to be more nurturing. Men, you can see this even in the way we approach our sexuality, which men tend to be less monogamous. That a man may have far more partners in his lifetime than a woman would. And you can see this particularly, again, in our sexuality. The majority of, say, pornography addicts and even gay men and lesbian women, the number of sexual partners are higher for men than it is for women. So this is something that is linked into masculinity, is this whole discussion of sexuality. But we can't limit the image of God and say, well, it's just physicality.
Mm-hmm.
There is something more than that about being made in God's nature. Scholars have been debating for years and trying to narrow it down. Is it the fact that we are sentient in a way that no other species is? Is the fact that we have developed linguistics, or that we have creativity? My suspicion is that we reflect God in very specific ways in his character. Moral awareness and the capacity for morality and moral awareness would be one of those. As would something like creativity.
Mm.
Animals can do art. Even there are fish on the bottom of the ocean that draw patterns to attract a mate. But that's instinctive and programmed. But for us, creativity, artistic expression, that's as unique as we are as individuals. So all of those things factor in. I think where this idea of being made in the image of God comes in. The idea of the Latin phrase, the imago Dei.
Yes.
Image of the deity or image of God. is what we were talking about before you hit the record button. Is the idea of identity. Your only two options for identity is to either say we have one that can be imposed from the outside, or we don't have one, which leaves us to decide what our identity is going to be. And flowing from that are things like purpose, meaning, what you do with your life, why you exist, why you have any kind of value. If there is no cause for me in the universe, I don't have any inherent value. I only have value if it has been imposed from the outside, genuine value. Now, I can believe I have value and might not have it, but again, the entire Christian tradition is, if there is a God, then He has the ability to assign us value. And I think that's the ultimate statement about the Imago Dei, is that our value sits at the height of creation because we have been designed by God to hold that position and not for any other reason. If you strip away the idea that God made us, and if we are just a random product of chemicals, then one person's identity is as good as the next. And there is no inherent reason for things like human rights, for the insecurities that we all have, or the desire that many have to end their own lives. If you don't have value, anything is possible. But if God is the one who determines the value, then our value is an expression of who He is. So when we are designed for a relationship, we are exploring God to discover who we are.
So Rick, that article that I wrote for Renew a while back on Andrew Tate, when you read through that, was there anything that you thought that, yeah, this makes sense, and I see this in our world today when it comes to young men?
So with the Andrew Tate article that you wrote, what really struck a nerve with me is how Andrew Tate is tapping into a vacuum in our culture presently of young men who are confused, struggling with what does it mean to be a man, and trying to understand manhood. So Andrew Tate has he has really tapped into that, and young men have by the droves have followed him and his model, his example of manhood, on masculinity being defined as more of this aggressive and at times even abusive behavior and attitude. But I think that's the swing of the pendulum, where young men are more open to that, because the swing of the pendulum up to the other extreme of more femininity and passivity. So what hit me in reading the article is not only what Andrew Tate has tapped into, but how we're missing the boat in the church if we're not truly stepping up and mentoring and modeling for young men what it means biblically to be a man, that biblical concept of manhood, where there is strength there, but it's a strength with humility. It's a strength that is tempered with graciousness, and the model, of course, the perfect model of Jesus, showing that way.
Okay. After hearing a lot of these guys speak, I think especially Rick kind of echoed exactly what I was thinking. I've seen this shift, the pendulum swing in this radical feminist movement, that men, they feel like they can't say anything against, or they're going to be ostracized, they're going to be canceled, whatever. So I think seeing Andrew Tate kind of rise in his popularity, in his peak, it was the pendulum, and so many men going to him, was the pendulum swinging the opposite direction. There's so many things that men saw in him was this guy standing up about being a man, even though maybe they didn't agree on some of the aspects. They saw a man standing up to be, and saying, "I don't care what you say. That's feminine. That's like a lady." And people, I think that they felt like he was a voice for them. And so that's why I think these people gravitated toward.
Right. I think so. And both James and Rob talked about it, that there's something deep within inside a man. It's more than cultural. It's not just an American thing. You're going to find this all over the place, because it's in our spiritual DNA to be aggressive in a good way. And Andrew Tate's a jerk. We all get that. But in a culture that says to men, you need to be like girls, and Wolfgang talked about that. You need to be like girls. You need to be soft, and and things like that, there's something that rises up in a boy that says, hey, I want to make a difference. And in that, Andrew Tate does things like he says, traditional manhood, traditional maleness, that means I'm not ruled by my emotion, but rather, despite my emotion, I run into the fire to save people. So you have a void, and they all talked about this void, and what am I going to do with it? Am I going to feel something positive, or am I going to step back? Going back to the article that I wrote, I finished the article by referring to a book that was written in 2002. The author's name was John Eldredge. The title of the book is Wild at Heart. And in the book, he makes the observation that we all have a wound, and there are a lot of wounds going on right now, that one of two things will happen if that wound is not plugged by Jesus Christ and our identity and being created in God's image. One of two things is going to happen. Either the boy, the young man, will go violent, and that's Andrew Tate, or young men will go passive, lifeless, and purposeless. Now, we don't want Andrew Tate, but we don't want the second part either. Right. And right now we have legions of young men who are lifeless, who are purposeless, and we don't want that either. So we want to be able to speak into that void and bring something positive.
Yeah. I think it's finding that middle ground, stopping that pendulum from swinging to the two extremes and saying, okay, this is what a balanced biblical man looks like. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the issue. It's like, we know the problem. So what's the solution then? How do we address this? And I know that you talked about in this podcast, you want to give applications, you want to give challenges to the viewer, and that will help them understand what it means to be a man. So what is something like, what's the challenge today? What can they do to be more of a balanced biblical man? Right.
Well, the challenge today, and we're going to hit this challenge just multiple times throughout our series, and I'm hoping this series will go on to another series and another series. But it's really simple. It's really simple that in addition to knowing your purpose and knowing Jesus Christ, and considering the fragmentation of the family, fragmentation of the culture, and Max talked about that. They all talked about it in some respect. But the challenge to younger men is to go find an older man that you respect, and to humbly go before that older man and say, hey, I'm here, give me some advice, and then listen. Now, that's the challenge. I want to challenge all you young men to go do that. Find a solid man and just say, hey, I'm here, I'm listening, can you give me some advice?
And I think that's a good challenge, because I think back to how I was between the ages of 15 and 25. And of course, as you age, you start to learn. The more you don't know, the more you learn you don't know. But as a 15, 16, even a 20-something-year-old, I didn't need advice. I thought I didn't need advice. I thought I was great. I thought I was a good man. And then I got married. And I learned a lot about myself very quickly, that I was not who I thought I was. So I think that's actually a bigger challenge than it seems. Yeah, I think it's a really good one. But I think it's a really good challenge to give young men, especially if they can kind of drop that pride and understand they're not who they think they are. Mm-hmm. They're missing a lot of qualities that they probably don't even know.
And this is especially true when you're looking at young men who did not grow up with a father in their life. Now, and I said that we're going to come back to this question many times in further episodes. And what I did to demonstrate this in some of the men that we've already heard from and some other men, when I was talking to them, I said, okay, if you had a young man standing before you right now, 15 to 25, younger man, and you had one opportunity to give him a piece of advice, what would it be? So what we're going to do now is we're going to look at a few of these conversations. And I actually started with a younger guy. He's 34. And his name's Wes Koval. And the interesting thing about Wes is I remember him when he was in elementary school, and I baptized him when he was in elementary school. Well, he's grown up. He's had some knocks. He's learned some lessons, and today he's married. He has 2 children, both under 2, and he has his own company, Pixels. You can find the information in the show data on Wes, but we want to listen to Wes, just kind of, starting this journey, things that he has learned. Then we're going to go back to Max. We're going to listen to what Max had to say and hear from him in his life. And then from there, we're going to go up the age bracket a little bit more, and we're going to listen to Rick Grover again. Now, I circled back to Rick. What do we know about Rick? He's a pastor, East 91st Street in Indianapolis, great church, been in vocational ministry for a long time. But Rick is also the executive director of a ministry called Covenant Connections, which their main drive, their focus is on soul care for pastors. And they do that through pastors making a commitment to each other in small groups and doing life with each other. Now, the point is this: if pastors need a band of brothers, if pastors need this, doesn't it stand to reason that every man needs this, and especially younger men? So we're going to listen to Rick a little bit and get his thoughts on this. And then we're going to go to an older guy, a man by the name of Steve Spicer. And Steve will actually be our main guest for our second episode. Steve's got a great story. Steve was very successful in the corporate realm, made a lot of money, but he is the co-founder and president of a ministry called Marked Men for Christ. And so we're going to get his advice. And then finally, we're going to go to a guy by the name of G.F. Watkins. And out of all these men, he is the man that I've known the shortest amount of time, about a year. But he's an older man, got a world of wisdom. He's founder of Manhood University. So we want to hear from him and just the pieces of advice that they would give if they were speaking into a heart of a young man today.
All right, let's get into it.
Well, I would encourage him, number one, to seek out the wisdom of an older man. And I try to take myself back to the age of whatever, teenage, early 20s. And my aptitude to listen to an elderly man would only be somebody that I had an interest in. Now, I'm talking about from a self-centered point as a young teenager, me, not others, just speaking for myself. And so, first of all, getting the right person to plug in with a young man is important. But the reason why the young man should listen is because we should have questions for them. And we would under certain circumstances. Let's say you got to meet an astronaut that actually walked on a distant planet, landed in a spacecraft and got out and walked on it. Wouldn't you want to, if you had the time, to sit and ask, what was that like? What did it feel like when you got out and stepped on that without the gravity around and everything? I mean, did it feel like regular ground? You would go through all these different questions. And that's exactly what we should be encouraging young men to do with older men. And likewise, by the way, can I add patience with the older men to speak with the younger men in that? Because wisdom is not because these guys are just older than you, or smarter than you, or have a higher IQ than you do. It's because they've been alive and cognizant longer than you have. And they have run into some things, or like the insurance commercial says, and we've seen some things. Well, that counts, see, because you add that in with the things that we've learned otherwise educationally, and we put those together, that comes to an understanding and wisdom. So first of all, they should seek out that wisdom, or you end up with an example like Rehoboam in scriptures. Now Rehoboam, he was in the kingdom of Israel during a very, very arduous time, because it was the beginning of civil war. And King Solomon has died, and the kingdom itself is under turmoil because Solomon enslaved literally his own people and put them to work to building Jerusalem, not just building the temple that we always read about, but building his palace. And in the subsequent palaces for his 700 plus wives. And so the people were fed up with this conscription that was placed upon them. So when Solomon died, they go to his son Rehoboam and they say, are you going to be like your daddy and continue enslaving us? And what does Rehoboam do? He seeks out the elders in the community and piles up all the wisdom of the old men and asks them. No, that's not what he does. He goes up there with his friends, his peeps, and he asks them, what do they think? And what do you think a young, unexperienced man's going to give to a new buddy? His buddy's the new king. It's like, double down, show him who's boss. And so it was a terrible advice. It split the kingdom and just ended up being the northern 10 tribes and the two that were left. And that was it for years and years and years past that. So all of that to say, seek out that wisdom and counsel. Just take it into consideration, I would say to them. Just hear them out. You don't have to do what they say, but just listen to what they say.
Yeah. I'm almost 35 and I grew up in this period of time where, if you ever heard of them, the emo stage. Growing up in that era is a lot different. I don't think we have the same, it's not the same generation. Our younger generation isn't going through the same stuff we did back in the 90s or the early 2000s. I found myself gravitating towards a lot of people that I wanted to be like. And some of the people, a lot of them were musicians, and they would produce music that is probably not the best type of music to absorb. And even though I wasn't thinking about how that they were more manly or that's how a man should be, I was absorbing that sort of content. Okay. And like I said, it was negative content. So my life kind of went into that direction of negativity. And I found out finally in my mid 30s, just recently, that the real person you should be gravitating towards is Jesus. Okay. And the more you try to walk in his shoes, the better person you're going to be, a better role model you're going to be, the happier you're going to be. And in my eyes, that is how a man should be.
What sort of advice would I give to 20-year-old me? I'd say to myself to trust the word of Jesus Christ, who has infinite love for you. And I'll tell myself to distrust the world. I'll tell myself to distrust and doubt the word of the world.
I would say to him that if you are trying to go it alone in life and you only have surface level friends or acquaintances or people that you're connecting with, other men that you're connecting with through social media, Instagram, TikTok, you're missing the boat, and you are going to truly struggle in life, in all aspects of life, with the possibility of marriage, with being a dad, a father, with vocation, with your occupation, because when we are void of those deeper relationships, our souls are fractured, and we struggle with direction in life. So the advice I would give is, hey, let's walk with you to find that band of brothers, so that you are having others that are leaning in, speaking into your life, and you're going through life together. We desperately need that. We're created for that.
Get outside. Yeah, I think there's two types of personalities, and maybe you can blend them into one. Are you an inside man or an outside man? And what does that mean? And your inside man, he's looking for comfort. He's looking for his routine. Every day feels the same. I don't want to go outside to be adventurous, to explore what could happen. I mean, it could rain outside today. That wasn't part of your plan. I mean, it could be extremely hot, right? Extremely cold. Let me just stay inside where it's safe and comfortable, and I got my routine. I feel like I'm in control when I'm inside.
In control.
And yeah. And what I want men to feel is, how about you get out of control just for a second, where you're not in control of your environment, right? But you have to adjust, right? As the outside world impacts your life, how are you going to respond? How are you going to adjust? How are you going to step up? Or are you going to run away?
I love that. That's I think of Peter. Peter had to get out of the boat. Peter said, "Can I do it?" Jesus said, "Come on." And yeah, he fell. But the fact is that he's the only one that got out. So what I'm hearing you say, Steve, is they need to take a risk. They need to let's get out of our comfort zone. Is that where you're going with all that?
I just love that Peter example. And right, all too often we talk about how he took his eyes off of Christ, started focusing on the environment, and then began to sink and yells out, "Save me!" Right, and God responds and He saves them. But you know what? What about all those other guys back in the boat? Man, they're just watching, right? And how many, right, are men today just watching other men, take a risk, be on adventure, have a dynamic experience, and we're just watching it, right? We're watching the highlights. Man, why don't you be the guy that we're watching? Man, get out of your comfort zone and grow. I mean, when was the last time you got hit in the mouth? I'm not talking about violence or looking for fights. What I mean being hit in the mouth is where, man, like you were just, wow, what just hit me? And I don't mean that someone just gave you 10 more likes on a post you just made on Instagram or Snapchat or whatever. I'm talking about, man, you just had a dynamic experience and now you got to respond and you get to make a choice. And how are you going to respond? I mean, now again, I don't want to, Steve, say that, if you're 20 something, 30 something, and say that everybody's an inside guy. And clearly there are men that are out there, that are living life and they're living large. And man, and they are growing through their experiences. And like Peter, right, who had the courage to step out, right, experience the dynamic waves and the wind, right, and then he experienced sinking and he needed help. He realized he couldn't do it on his own. And he needed a power bigger than him. And that power, his name is Jesus Christ, right, the Savior of the world. And so he reached out and said, to Jesus to save him, and Jesus saved him. Man, when was the last time, if you're listening, that you cried out, "Man, I need help," and somebody save me,
being honest,
because I'm in a dynamic experience right now. I'm uncomfortable. I'm unsafe. I need a power bigger than me. I need help. I need a brother, right? Or I need multiple men, or I need God Himself to come in and rescue me right now.
Simplify everything, Steve. I'm talking for the guys my age. Simplify everything. Be profound, not prolonged. These guys, they don't need a ton of stuff. They just need you to look them in the face, grab them on the shoulders, love on them, give them a big bear hug, tell them you can do this. Affirm them. Affirmation is what changes a man's life. And most men, no matter what age they are, maybe 15 or 50, they've never had a father's hug. How do I know? Because I've hugged thousands, if not hundreds of thousands. Leaving to Peru on Monday to do it again for 23rd time. And there'll be hundreds of men that come up and will weep, and they're 60 and 70 and 80, and they'll say, "I've never had a father tell me I can do it. I'm good enough. And my family doesn't think I'm good enough." And a father's hug solidifies that. So what do I tell them? I tell them what God told His son. "This is my son in whom I'm well pleased. Y'all listen to him." That's the Southern version. And all of a sudden, his son came up who had never done one miracle. And he came out of the Jordan River and he performed more miracles in enjoying his destiny than the Bible says in John than the earth could contain. What was the catalyst? It was the Father's affirmation. What do we need today? The Father's affirmation. What does it say? "Son, you have a purpose, and it's not just natural. It's supernatural." And start looking to eternity and explain that to him as an older man. The only thing that matters in this world is the next life, not this one. You use this one to get ready for the treasure in the next one. And we're all, my old man said like this. He said, we're all like a carton of milk. We have this expiration date on us. And it's just a matter of time until we're off the planet.
Right.
And then what are you going to do? Is it going to heaven or are you going to hell? Because you're not going to stay in the dirt. You're going somewhere. Are you prepared? And based upon that decision, what kind of action are you going to have today?
You know, Matthias, it was really interesting to hear those men talk. And I love the way that we did it, starting with the younger man, starting with Wes. And Wes talked to this reality that there are so many voices out there, especially in the music industry. And he went through a period in time when he was embracing these particular groups and this particular music. It wasn't so much that he was enjoying the music, that he was embracing the philosophy and the negativity that came with that. But he was able to pivot. He was able to find his ultimate purpose in following Jesus Christ. Going back to Max, Max is a genius, and I loved what he said there. What would I say to myself? What would I say to myself if I were talking, the 20-year-old Max? I mean, I think about me. What advice would I give the 20-year-old Steve? But I like the way he summarized that I will trust Jesus more and distrust the world. I like the way that James set the whole thing up. Going back to 1 Kings, I think it's chapter 12, where Rehoboam was the king, and he rejected the advice of the elders, and he took the advice of his contemporaries, and it was destructive. I love the way that James set all that up. The advice of Rick, the reality that we need a band of brothers, and so many young men, they don't have community. They talk with guys on Facebook or Instagram, Snapchat, whatever. They talk with guys, but they don't have the kind of community where they're looking at each other eyeball to eyeball. Thinking about Steve Spicer, that challenge there, get out of your comfort zone. And then GF, this idea of speaking to older men, hey, this is what I would tell younger men. So I resonated with a lot of what those guys gave us.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting to see the life experiences that they kind of bring to the table. Okay, this is what I struggle with, and I think just like Max did very intentionally, I think inadvertently everybody is like, okay, what did I struggle with? Let me give you some good advice with what's made me a man of God. What's made me more of a man. And I resonated a lot with Wes. I used to listen to emo music, and I think at the time and I think this also comes from a lack of biblical manhood. A man, to previous generations was, you don't talk about feelings, you don't cry, which I think there's got to be balance there.
There's balance there.
There's balance of affirming, like, hey, I know you're struggling with this. I'm here with you, and I think a lot of guys in my generation, especially, I think a lot of people in the audience could resonate with this if you're listening, is that I liked that music because it made me feel like somebody else felt that. Somebody else was going through those struggles. Somebody else was, and kind of putting it in a poetic and heavy way. And so it's like almost like you're recognizing, this is how I'm feeling. Other people feel this way, but then you stay kind of stuck in that. It's like you're stuck there, right? Yeah, you're stuck there. So it's kind of learning how to come out of that, getting edification and affirmation, like Wes talked about, to kind of bring yourself out of that and go, okay, this is what I was struggling with. This is what I need now from this. And I really liked Spicer. I can personally take his advice, because I am somebody who does not like to get out of his comfort zone. If you ask my wife, I would stay home every day the rest of my life if I could and just eat. So I think that one really resonated with me, as like, I need to do things. And I notice when I stay like that for too long, I start to feel purposeless. I start to feel unfulfilled, and I'm comfortable, but I'm unfulfilled. And I know that I've tried to also kind of get out of my comfort zone, and then I feel, if I don't do something well instantly, I feel like a failure. Right. Yeah. So it's like, it's learning those affirmations. No, I'm not a failure. I'm getting out of my comfort zone. I'm going to mess this up sometimes, but I need to find some fulfillment. I need to find some purpose. I need to get out and do something.
Yeah. And Spice talked about the reality that you might get hit in the face.
Yeah, exactly.
And the truth of the matter is, we like action adventure movies. Well, we like the struggle in those movies. We don't always like when we live the struggle.
Right.
And it reminds me of Theodore Roosevelt, one of my favorite presidents in history. And he gave this speech one time, and part of the speech has been put together in its own little speech called The Man in the Arena. And I love that. We're going to talk about that sometime. And part of the point is the credit goes to the guy who's in the arena, even if he gets the snot beat out of him. Why? Because he's in it. It's one thing to talk, be outside of the arena. It's one thing to be in the fight.
Yeah, it's like the guys at a football game yelling, "Oh, come on, you could have done this, do this, do this." And it's like, if you ran up to him and be like, "All right, put the helmet on, get in the game, then you do it."
Right. Exactly. So there's this challenge to get out of your comfort zone.
Yeah, I think that's a big one, especially for me.
And I loved it again with GF said that these young men need affirmation. And I think, Matthias, that's what we want from this podcast. We want to be able to look at young men and to say, we believe in you. We believe in what you can be ultimately because God made you. And so we want this to be an affirmation to what young men can be.
Yeah, I think that ultimately will bring a lot of healing. And bring a lot of, like I said, with the affirmations is like, okay, well, the music resonated with me. If I had these affirmations, I would have the confidence to go through failure to get out of my comfort zone.
There you are.
So I think that's exactly what this generation needs. I think that's what young men need, and I think that's what's going to help them thrive.
Mm-hmm.
So we talked about the challenge.
Big challenge.
Big challenge. Finding a man, a mentor to give advice, to get advice from. Is there a smaller challenge that we can kind of go through?
There is. That first one's a big challenge, and we're going to hit that a lot throughout the man identity. But this is kind of a fun one, although someone may not think it's fun. But football.
I don't think it's fun.
Football. This Thursday, opening game, I think it's the Cowboys playing. I don't know who they're playing. I am cursed to always be a Dallas Cowboys fan. But football.
I saw you post that meme the other day. He said the last time they won a Super Bowl was like the Roman Empire.
Yeah, exactly.
And they're in a chariot.
I appreciate that. So I'm going to put men into two categories. I know there are more than two. There's 3, 4, 5, 6. Some guys just absolutely hate the NFL because of political things and like that. Not talking about that. Category A would be guys who just don't like football. Category B would be guys who are addicted to football. So for category A, so young men, guys who don't like football, here's the challenge: that you find the closest NFL team to you, wherever you live at in the U.S. And if you're in England, if you're in Germany, soccer, football, soccer, I get it. We're talking we're talking U.S. real football.
U.S. football.
So find the nearest team to you, and for the first couple of weeks, follow that team. Find out who their players are, the key players. Find out the scores. Watch at least one game, and here's why: because out of this, you're actually going to build community. Out of this, you're actually going to find yourself able to be in a band of brothers. Doesn't mean you have to like it, but to be knowledgeable of what's going on. Now, part of it, again, is just fun. Here's an illustration. I've got a buddy. He's a Kansas Chiefs fan, and he knows I'm a Dallas fan. So he is always poking me every time Dallas does something dumb.
So he pokes you a lot.
He pokes me a lot. But the challenge is to at least put a foot in the pool to know what's going on, to be able to have the dialogues. What's interesting, that there are a few people who will see the title for our first episode. Yeah, here we go. That wasn't just, okay, this is our first episode. It comes from the Dallas Cowboys. Dak Prescott is their quarterback. And before the center snaps the ball on the line of scrimmage, the quarterback will say something to let the team know we're set, we're ready. That's what Dak Prescott does. Yeah, here we go. And they snap the ball. So the first group, if you're part of the group and you don't like football, the challenge is for at least the first week, maybe the first 2 weeks, just pay attention. Now,
and I think I want to emphasize on this challenge. I think it's good because I myself don't like football. A lot of my friends don't care for football, but it's such a big thing that at least a few people, even if in your maybe even in your circle, but people that know football.
Right.
So it's kind of expanding your circle, kind of being able to find that camaraderie with people you may not even have it with in a certain way right now. It just kind of expands on that, right?
Right. And there's a principle there, and we're going to talk about this in other episodes as well, that part of being a man is having a general knowledge of a lot of different things. You don't need to be an expert in everything, but having a general knowledge of a number of different things so you can better serve other people. Now, category B, there are some guys who are just addicted to this. I mean, they know every stat there is. Now, unless you are getting paid, I don't know if you need to be this addicted. So here's the challenge that some guys may not like. But the first 2 weeks, I want to challenge you not to watch one game.
I think they'd rather miss eating than miss the game.
You know what? There's some guys that are like that. But unless you are paid as a sports commentator, I don't know if you need to look at every piece of data that is out there. So the challenge is for at least the first week of the season, maybe 2 weeks, because you might be better if you do that, but not to watch one game. Not to pick up your phone and check the stats, but to see, can I be in control of football instead of football being in control of me?
That's a big ask, I think, for a lot of people. I think that's a pretty big ask, Steve, but I think these are pretty good. They might not see it as little challenges, but I think they're pretty little challenges, especially for me. I'm like, okay, I can learn some football things about the Texans. Or Cowboys.
About the Texans. Well, we live in Houston, so,
Yeah. I kind of forget the Texans are a thing sometimes. So, yeah, I think these are some pretty good challenges that we can kind of do this week. And I think that big one, finding a man to get advice from. I think that ultimately, if you do one big thing this week, let it be that. I think you'll greatly benefit from it. Find the right man, too. I think that's a big thing.
Yeah, find a man, because there are a lot of guys that will give you advice, but if they have not invested in your lives, it doesn't mean you have to listen to them. But I guarantee you that there's a man in your life someplace, maybe your boss, maybe an uncle. Here's another reason why you need to be connected to a local church. Find an older man. You may not know him really well, but he can give you general pieces of advice, and we need that. And I think it's been a good episode. I'm excited to see how this goes. Let me wind down with this personal story from my life. I didn't meet my biological father until I was 25. He and my mother divorced when I was about about a month old, excuse me. And then my mother remarried when I was 7 or 8, Jim Hinton, and he adopted me. Jim had his own baggage, and there was really no relationship there. So I was searching for manhood. But I remember a time in particular, we were over at my aunt's house, and my uncle, who is like the biggest mentor in my life, was out on the back porch with my dad, Jim Hinton, with my uncle's father. His name's Walter, and a couple of other men. And for whatever reason, I'm in the kitchen. And I actually talk about this story in the book that I wrote called Confessions of Finding Hope in One Pastor's Doubt. And I talk about this in the book in a section on manhood. But I'm in the kitchen with the women. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm bored out of my skull. And this is like July, so the screen door is open. And I heard the father of my uncle yell my name. He goes, "Hey, Steve, come out here and sit with the men." And it may not seem like a big deal, but it was a situation where I'm in here with the women, and he says, "Hey, come out and be with us, be with the men." And I think about that, And Matthias, that's my hope, that we working in this and working with this podcast, that we could reach out to the young men and say, hey, come out and be with us. Grab a cup of coffee once a week, coffee, Diet Coke, beer, whatever, and come sit with us and let's talk about what it is to be a man of purpose.
You know, I really like the story that you told about him just inviting you out to be with the men. That's such a powerful thing for, I think, a kid to hear, is come be with me. It's like, oh, I'm wanted by the men.
Yeah.
You know, to be with other men, and it almost like calls you up to find a kind of almost like imagine like a little kid putting on his dad's shoes. Like, all right, I'm a man, you know? Yeah. So I think that's a beautiful description of what we're trying to do with this podcast. Is like, come be with the men. Let's figure out what being a man is. You know, let's do this together. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to like, subscribe, and feel free to check out our website on Buzzsprout. Make sure to leave a comment on this video on whatever platform you're listening to. Oh, that was bad. Hang on. Do it again.